And this is the one that I'm going to work on and use some tools to deform this mesh that we haven't talked about before. Okay, so I've got my flat philodendron leaf, right? Right now it's just a plane. And what I want to be able to do is I want some of these fronds, I want these fronds to have curl, right? The entire thing I kind of want to be able to curl over. And then some of these are going to curl. Maybe they'll twist a little bit. Maybe even one of them will pull up rather than bow down with the rest of them. And so I want to show you how to do that without making yourself totally insane. Okay, so you could do this with sculpt tools as well, but there's some nice features with doing this in points or edges mode that allow you basically being able to use the rotate tool to rotate and round something that way is a really effective way to do it. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use our live selection tool. Now, in the past when we've used the live selection tool, right, we've selected something and we've been able to move those, but they move as they move in isolation from the rest of the mesh, right? And what we really want is, if we're doing something organic and we're making a curl, I want to be able to select this point and have the strength of the motion be spread all the way along to some other arbitrary point, or the strength of the rotation to affect all these points along here at a lessening degree as it gets further from the point that I've selected. Right? Because that is going to make modeling this so much easier. So what I'm going to do to make that happen is with my live selection tool selected and the options up here, I'm going to change the mode from normal to soft selection. And when I do that, I get this soft selection tab that pops up. I'm going to hold down Shift so that soft selection tab is also up. And I'm going to uncheck surface. So this is the state that I believe your soft selection tool should be in. The radius is going to be a little different. It might be as small as 10. I can't remember. But I believe the strength's at 100. So with this is the default way what you're going to see. And what this gradient, this orange gradient means is this is the most selection strength, and anything that comes out here, this is less selection until no selection. So if I move this now, you'll see that the whole mesh curves up or curves down with the selection, but only within this radius, right? And so my radius is 50 centimeters. If I boost this up to, 260 centimeters, right, it's going to be able to lift or drop, right, this entire thing. And you'll see how that impacts the way that this geometry is manipulated, right? It's really nice and smooth. And this is with linear fall off. There's different types of fall off, right? And so linear, right, if we were looking at this graph, would be a straight line from here to here, right? This is full strength, that's no strength, right? If I go to Bell, you can even see how this changes, right? It's basically a steeper curve. So the influence falls off faster. There is also Circle, which, right, basically is a much harder, it's a fuller thing with like a harder edge that's still soft, but it's circular, right? There is Needle, which is going to basically make kind of an exponential curve of influence. So, it doesn't influence all of your area that much, but it influences the area close very, very strongly. And then Vertex Map, we're not going to talk about right now, and Spline. That would be this spline in here that just became active, right? If I wanted to, have some sort of custom impact, right, I can adjust this spline here to change how this impact is done, how this is impacted. For this example, we're just going to use linear because it works pretty well for what we're doing. Right, so I have the radius set to 250. Now, one of the issues is, what if I want to be able to, say, lift only this frond, or only this lobe, or only this lobe, right? But I've got this point is selecting everything around it. And so the way that I do that is I check mark this surface button. And what that does is it will, anytime there's an edge break, it's going to stop the influence of that. And you'll notice there's a little influence on the outside of this here, but if I was to go ahead and, I can change which point I have selected, and that could potentially impact or, adjust how much impact this has here. And so, that's going to lift or drop a little bit. I could also, reduce the radius some, in order to isolate that motion a little bit more. So let's go ahead and get started. But for first, what we want to do is we really want to be able to curl the whole leaf forward and down a bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my view a touch. And I'm going to go ahead and just select, this very front tip point. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to increase my radius so that the entire leaf is affected in some way, shape, or form, right? I might as well go to 1,000 centimeters. This is a huge leaf. It's a meter long. And so there's a couple things I'm going to want to do when I do this. So first, I want to be able to make this curl down. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can see that, I haven't quite got the edges of the leaf as fully selected as I would like. And so what I need to do is I need to figure out, how am I going to make that a little bit stronger in my selection? And the way I can do that is, one, if I uncheck surface, that's going to make a huge difference, right? You can see already just from that top view that I get a lot more selection, and I can have this whole thing, lift up and down in space. Now you'll also notice that, it'd actually be nice if I had a little bit less. If my radius was a little bit shorter, I might get less motion on the stem, and I'll get less motion on that end entirely, And so really, ideally, maybe I want this to be more at, let's try 670 or so, So there we go. We get like a little bit of motion here. And so with this, I'm able to lift this up and down, but it's not really curling under, And even if I push down and pushed in, that's not doing what I want it to do either, It's sort of just smushing or stretching it. What I want it to do is rotate. And so instead of moving this point as my first step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the rotate tool. And I'm just going to go ahead and rotate the end of this leaf. And you'll see it actually lifts it up. But if I rotate the end of the leaf, now I'm starting to get this curvilinear shape across the leaf. And then if I use the move tool, I can push this end in just a little bit and maybe pull it down a touch. And I start to get, a little bit more of the kind of curve that I want, So this is the general curve that I'm looking for. Now, let's say that, most leaves, the center part, some leaves, the center part is lifted up a little bit higher in these leaves. The fronds tend to fall. So how can I select, the center of this and just lift the center? Well, I can't with the loop selection tool, which is what I'm going to use. And loop selection remembers the letter U on the keyboard and the letter L. All of my what's it called? My soft selection disappears, but if I go ahead and select this edge and hold down Shift and select this edge, and then I go back to the soft selection tool, what I get is a soft select, or I go back to the live selection tool. What I get is a soft selection from those center points. So let's go ahead and drop our radius significantly, I'm actually going to make it maybe somewhere around 125 centimeters, And so now what I can do is I can just go ahead and lift these center points up, And it's going to go ahead and pull this. Now I might actually want this to be a little bit bigger so that, I want it gray on the edges of the leaf so it's not moving as much, but I don't want it to, there we go. I just want that curve to be really, really bent out, So now I've got a leaf that is folded and flipped similarly to how we would expect that to be flipped, to be sent. Now the stem, right, should actually have additional geometry, but I'm gonna wait to add that until after I get done shaping it. Right? It's significantly easier to make these curvilinear forms with with this plane and then add geometry to it to give it thickness in a little bit. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want some of these to be upturned, some of these to be downturned, maybe to have a little bit of a twist to them. So how do I do that? So first I'm going to start with this center frond here, and I'm going to select, I might just go ahead and shift click and select all the points on this outside edge. And then what I need to do is I want to check mark surface, right? Because what that's going to do is it's going to isolate this, this selection area to just this frond. And when I've done that, right, I could lift this, if it's just a little bit of a deviation, right, I could just lift this up or push it down a touch. But then I can also, again, rotate this edge, right? So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this a little bit. And you'll see it is pulling a touch on that mesh. And so I just need to make sure that when I do something like that, that I go back to my move tool. And if it seems like an unnatural amount of arch, or if it's just lifted up too high, that I come down here and I just, adjust it until it seems to be, more or less where it is, right? And so now I've got this one frond, or I keep calling it a frond. I've got this one lobe that is, a little bit lower than the other. If I want to do something similar on this, I can go ahead and actually maybe lift this up a touch, and maybe we actually rotate this a little bit this way. And even if I twisted it a little bit this way, right, just with that one point, I can get, something that's a little bit more interesting. And maybe I need to lift the whole thing up just a touch so that that is a little bit smoother throughout there. Right? And so I can get a lot more variation in this object as I continue to do this. I'm not going to go ahead and go through too many more motions. I would like you all to do this, but maybe I do want to twist the whole front edge here. So let's go ahead and we're just going to select all of these points on this front edge. And then I'm going to hit rotate, and I just want to twist this a little bit this way. And then maybe pull this up a touch and move it over a hair. Right. And I haven't overlapped any of these sections yet, but you could absolutely have one of these overlapping with another if you so desire. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that with some of these like gentle lifts and twists and curls in there without doing too much more to this mesh. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this where I'm at. And at this point, what I need to do is I need to create more. What I'm going to want to do is I want to test it with a subdivision surface. So let's go ahead and drop that on, because right, I want to see what this looks like once it's actually got a smooth mesh on it, and it actually looks really nice that way, right? You can see that all of these polygons that it's created are pretty even. Oh, you'll notice that there is one error in my mesh, which these 2 points are just not connected. So I'm going to go ahead and use my my Polygon Pen, and I'm just going to drag this up and snap it in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull out a little bit. And you can see that that fixed that. So that subdivision surface actually allowed me to see a hole that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. And it looks like there's another problem area right over here. So where is this additional geometry going to? Why is there an intersection there? And maybe that's because this subdivision surface is on. Yeah. So the subdivision surface is causing a couple problem areas in here, and what might work is to just create a little bit more geometry. There we go. Right, so you can see how just adding that little triangle in that corner, and I might want to do something similar on this edge. And then I could actually go ahead and create just another subdivision across here so that my geometry looks pretty even, right? And so there we go. So now that looks a lot cleaner, right? So these are some things that as you work with this, you'll see some of the problems that are happening. So I've got something that's looking pretty good. I'm really happy with this. So now what I want to do is I'm going to turn off the subdivision surface because I don't need it right yet. But what I want to do is I want to take this mesh, and you'll see I actually have an area here where I probably need some more geometry, but we're not going to worry about it right now. So I'm going to take this mesh, and I want to give it volume, right? Right now it's totally flat. It's just a surface. But what I want to do is I want to take this, and I want to make it somewhat thicker. So I'm going to go to Polygons mode. I'm going to hold down Command or Control A to select all. And then I'm going to select the extrude tool, right? You can hit the letter D on the keyboard to get it up. And one of the things that we need to do is if I just go ahead and extrude this right now, what I'm going to get is just a surface with an edge on it, right? You can see that it basically didn't give me the volume I was hoping for. It just created some extruded edges. And so what I need to do is I need to go down here to where it says polygons. I need to check mark create caps. And when I do that, if I hover off in space again, right, if you click on an actual polygon, it just moves things. It doesn't actually create the extrusion. So if I just click and drag here, now you'll see that it's actually, when I get done with this, it's created something a bit more. And I'm going to leave this, right, relatively thin. This is a leaf after all. And so I'm just going to create a little bit of additional thickness. And so now you can see, right, if I go underneath, this is actually 2 polygon faces. And so it's totally enclosed. And it's basically just copied the geometry from the top surface onto the bottom surface. Right? And now if I turn my subdivision surface on, you'll see that it goes and it really nicely rounds the edges of this. And I get something that looks really great. Now, the one last thing that I could do with this is I could come down here and I could continue to model on the stem, right? And so if I turn the subdivision surface off, and I come down to my stem, I could actually just use my live selection tool, but not, maybe not necessarily in the, in this mode because it's just too much, and restrict isn't going to work. None of these other options are really going to help me make this any better. And so I need to turn soft selection off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to mode and just go back to normal. And then I'm going to go ahead and I just want to select all of these polygons. And I could extrude this, but really I just want to make it a little bit fatter to start with. Oh, and it looks like I accidentally selected this edge polygon, so I'm going to hold down Control and delete that. Right, so now all I'm doing is making this just a little bit fatter. Right, and you can see I intentionally set it there so it thins a little bit. So now if I go back to turn my subdivision surface on, you can see that, right, again, this is, making this nice organic rounded form. And I know these fronds are actually a little different. They have more geometry to them. So I could go ahead and be more accurate, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to add any additional geometry to that to fix that. Okay. So now I've got this really nice, beautiful philodendron leaf. Yeah. And so that's a way that you do more complex modeling of especially like thin objects like leaves and things and organic shapes where you want that curvilinear form. And, you can do this with things that are not planes as well. You can use these same tools on any sort of 3D mesh that you've created. But this is just a really good use case for using those tools. And so from here, I could take this mesh in and, I don't need it in the subdivision surface because what I could do is I can go in and go to Sculpt and go ahead and subdivide this once and then subdivide it twice 3 times, 4 times, however many times I want. Oh, I think I made a mistake there. Hold on a second. Let's go back to standard. I only have some polygons selected, so I'm going to select this. I'm going to go to model mode. It might make sense to, because there's some of these edges that are super hard, it might make sense to use a subdivision surface and then bring that, and then make that editable and bring it into Sculpt. But I'm going to go ahead and just go with this into Sculpt and see what I get. So if I say subdivide, there we go, we're getting a little bit more there. And I go ahead and do 2, 3, right? So this is 2 levels, it's 3 subdivisions, but this is basically what we were seeing before with the subdivision surface, right? And so then now at this point I can go in and I can start modeling other surface features, right? Like if I go ahead and look at the image here, if I just say lines, that you can barely see because there's so many subdivisions. But right, if I look at that base image, there's a lot of things going on here in terms of the, the stem and all of the stuff that needs to be pressed into that surface. But now I've got a really great surface that I can start to work with and start to texture. Okay. The last thing that we should talk about is UVs for this object, because I want you to see, and actually maybe I'll undo these steps so it's not a sculpt object any longer, because that will make a little difference. But so, right, the other thing I want to do is I want to set up my UVs. And so you'll notice if I select this, I have no UVs, right? I have no UVW tag. And fortunately, the UVs on this are pretty simple. So I should be able to just say, it is a closed object, so it might get fussy with me, and I will need to find a way where I want to make a seam, right? With this, because, I could have this, the seam is probably least noticeable on the edges of the leaves as long as you're careful with your painting. And so what I will probably do is select this and use my loop selection tool and go into probably edges mode and see if I can hover around. I'm going to have to blow this up. See if I can select this the entire outline of this object, which it looks like I'm having a really hard time doing. Right? You can see that it's not looping the way I would like it to. It's all over the place. So this might be problematic in terms of creating creating the UVs, just because it's going to be a fun object to select the edges of. But if I hit the letter U and I go to Phong break selection, so N, so I hit U and then N, I should be able to have a little bit easier time going around this and selecting all of this. But no matter what, it's going to be kind of a nightmare. So I'm not going to actually unwrap this. But when I do, because I started with a flat object, right, I should just be able to unwrap it and relax it maybe once and get really nice, even polygons. But yeah, my suggestion would be to cut all the way around the entire edge so that you basically have a top and a bottom of your leaf. Okay, and that's the end of this tutorial. Right. So because we've covered UV unwrapping and everything in other tutorials, I'm going to leave that for you to do. But ideally, right, you'd have a top half and a bottom half of your leaf that you're going to unwrap. And something I may not have said in a previous tutorial about UV unwrapping is if you go to sculpt this, your base object's UVs still work, and that's what all the paint and everything gets applied to. So have a good afternoon.